On the rural outskirts of Colorado Springs, a police cruiser winds its way up a dark mountain pass known as Gold Camp Road. Typically, officers only come up here to break up keg parties and confiscate alcohol from minors. But not tonight.
Patrol officers received a call that led us to believe that somebody had seen something regarding a body up on Gold Camp Road.
The anonymous caller claimed a female body had been dumped near an overlook known as Point Sublime.
He discovered the body down the hillside, down the slope.
She was well-dressed, jeans, dark shirt, a jacket. Looked to be just like your average, in this case, very young victim.
Officers estimate the girl to be somewhere between the ages of 18 and 20. But her identity and the cause of death are still unknown.
Could somebody have been walking and fallen? Yes, that's a possibility. Hypothermia is a possibility. So we had to look at all kinds of different things before we were able to make that determination.
Police must also consider the possibility of foul play.
Lieutenant Kenda.
At 10 p.m., dispatchers notify Lt.Joe Kenda, homicide detective and head of the Major Crimes Unit.
We'd been working overtime for days. But unfortunately, these things aren't scheduled. Anonymous calls are placed. Discoveries are made. Bodies are found. Okay, let's go see what this is about.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Kenda and his detectives arrive on the scene. And he orders his men to inspect the body.
We're able to roll the body over. It was pretty obvious to me that she'd been there quite a while.
Equally obvious is the cause of death. One that quickly raises the alarm.
Lieutenant, what do you got? You're gonna need to come down here.
They turn her, and they notice a ligature mark on her throat. A ligature is a device used in strangulation, something you can apply pressure to the neck with. People believe you can strangle someone very quickly. You can't. It's a torturous death. It is one where they want to feel you die.
Kenda descends into the ravine and examines the victim. She appears much younger than he first imagined.
You look at this kid and you think, how could you have gotten to this in such a short time in your life? To wind up here with your throat crushed.
Whatever happened to the young girl, crime scene techs believe it didn't happen here.
And there was no sign of a struggle. There wasn't really anything at the scene other than the body itself.
Not only have a whodunit, we have a who isn't. She has a circle of friends. She has someone who last saw her alive. She has all kinds of things we need to find out that we can't know until we identify her.
Detectives start by going through the girl's pockets, but it seems the killer has cleaned them out.
There was no papers on her to identify her, no wallet, no identification card.
Upon closer inspection, one detective spots a clue on the teenager's hand.
One of the identifying marks that we found on the victim at that time was a small tattoo in the webbing of one of her hands where it had the initials J and M.
Ritz! Sir! I need you to check missing persons for a young girl with the initials JM on her left hand. Yes, sir.
Officers radio this information into dispatch and learn the anonymous tipster has called back.
Our anonymous caller says the victim's name is Maggie and that we should look at a Jill Youssef. So the next question is obvious. Who are you, Jill? The killer? The person that dumped her over the side? Somebody who came by later and didn't call the police?
Detectives run the name Jill Youssef through police records. They immediately get a hit.
Jill Youssef had an arrest with the Colorado Springs Police Department recently, just prior to this homicide, in which she was arrested for a shoplift.
29-year-old Jill had been caught stealing clothing from a local department store. And according to the police report, Jill had help.
This is so not my fault.
With her at the time of the arrest and a participant in the theft is a Margaret Fetty, known as Maggie.
That kind of tied at least the name Maggie and Jill together for us.
But that's not all police records reveal.
Margaret Fetty is a blonde female, blue-eyed, and has a tattoo bearing the initials JM. I am now 99.9% convinced that our Jane Doe is in fact Margaret Fetty.
In an effort to notify the victim's next of kin, investigators dig deeper into Maggie's records. But there's no one to call.
When you work a murder case, you always want to establish everything you can about the background of a victim. We couldn't produce a photograph of Maggie. No one had one, not even as a baby.
She'd become a ward of the state, so she was dependent of the Department of Social Services.
Her mother disavowed her. Father whereabouts was unknown.
The state had placed Maggie with a local organization called Chins Up, a group home that specializes in abandoned children.
Chins Up is a great place for kids to be able to go to school, be fed, have a nice environment, but it's not home.
On contacting Chins Up, detectives learned that Maggie ran away from the center a year ago. Since then, she's been living on the streets.
She was just all alone. You're in a situation where you have no support, no adult supervision. She really had nobody looking out for her but herself.
She is a human in a sea of humans.
Basically, she was 15 going on 25, you know?
So how did Jill and Maggie know each other? And what possible connection could Jill have to Maggie's murder? Detectives couldn't imagine the twisted tale that would unfold. A tale that would plunge this case even deeper into mystery.
The possibility of being a killer is in all of us. Animals kill for need. They kill because they have to. Humans kill because they want to.
Following an anonymous tip, Colorado Springs police find 16-year-old Maggie Fetty strangled to death off a mountain road outside of town. Given Maggie's age and the brutal nature of her murder, it's an especially disturbing case.
Maggie was an adolescent child who ultimately nobody cared about, and she gets thrown away, literally. Murdered and thrown away. This girl had no contact with anyone. The only people that were concerned about her were me and my guys.
It's my job to stand for her, to move forward so that we can find justice as to who did this and why.
When I talk about it, my stomach gets upset. I see it over and over and over. You look at this child at this crime scene, there'd be a flash and I'd see my daughter instead of Maggie. And you think, oh God, I don't want to lose anybody's daughter. Not mine, not anybody else's. Somebody has to pay for this.
Thanks to an anonymous tipster, detectives have identified a woman who might have some answers. 29-year-old Jill Youssef, an acquaintance of Maggie's.
It's not enough evidence to say that she's responsible for this death, but it is somebody that we can tie to and start at least contacting to try to obtain information.
In the early hours of December 4th, detectives knock on Jill Youssef's front door. A bleary-eyed Jill answers and agrees to come down to the station for questioning.
Tell me about your relationship with Maggie Fetty.
We hang out all the time. She's a lot of fun to be around.
She described Maggie as being her best friend,
According to Jill, she met Maggie about a year ago, not long after Maggie had left the group home.
That's okay. You can stay the night.
Since then, Jill had become something of a big sister to Maggie.
She had been through some of the things that Maggie had been through, so she could relate very well. It was amazing how well they clicked together.
In fact, Jill tells Kenda that she and Maggie had grown so close they even had matching tattoos.
They each had a little tattoo, JM, referring to Jill and Maggie. Each one of them had the same tattoo on their hands.
We became very close over the last year.
By all appearances, Jill Youssef doesn't behave like a suspect. In fact, Jill doesn't even appear to be aware that her best friend is dead.
So we say, well, you're really good friends with Maggie, aren't you? Oh, yeah, I am. I'm really good friends.
We're pretty much like sisters.
Well, your friend Maggie is dead.
Jill breaks down in tears, seemingly devastated by the news of Maggie's death. But Lieutenant Kenda suspects Jill might be holding something back.
Her demeanor, her body language has guilt written all over it. She can't sit still. We say, we found Maggie last night on a Gold Camp Road. And not only do I think you know about that, I think you're involved in it. Tell me I'm wrong.
If you didn't kill her, this is your chance to tell us your side of the story.
And Jill spills her guts.
Though adamant that she had nothing to do with the crime, Jill tearfully admits that she knows the killer's identity.
It was one of my friends.
Jill claims that Maggie was strangled by a mutual friend, a woman by the name of Melinda Stewart.
Jill was friends with Melinda. She was also friends with Maggie. They palled around together. Jill's statement was clearly saying that Melinda was the responsible party for this death.
Kenda and his team step out of the room and run a background check on Melinda Stewart.
Melinda does not have a criminal record. She's 29 years old. She's married to a sergeant in the United States Army. Nothing about her life or her circumstances would indicate that she's capable of killing someone.
Skeptical of the accusation, detectives circle back to Jill. That's when she makes another startling admission.
She openly admitted that she was present at the time the homicide occurred.
According to Jill, it happened 3 nights ago on what started as a typical Saturday evening. Jill had been hanging out at the Stewart's apartment, keeping Melinda company while her husband and his army buddies swapped stories.
What you got? Here.
Melinda suggested they have a girls' night on the town.
She says they're going to go out and they're going to take Maggie out. Okay. Then what? Well, we go pick up Maggie, or we buy a bottle of tequila. We decide we're going to go up on the Gold Camp Road and look at the city lights and drink. Jill says she's driving this car.
Oh my gosh.
And that Maggie is in the right front passenger seat, and Melinda is sitting in the back. And they're all talking and laughing and passing around a bottle of tequila.
Mickey, shut up!
The trio pulled off and parked at Point Sublime. According to Jill, that's when it happened.
Jill says, for no apparent reason, Melinda grabs an ace bandage that's inside the car and begins to strangle Maggie from behind. That Maggie is struggling to save herself. Jill is trying to stop Melinda. Jill says Melinda looks at her with blood in her eye and says, if you stop me, you're next.
According to Jill, once Melinda was sure Maggie was dead, she forced Jill to help her dispose of the body.
Strangled and dumped on the side of the road. discarded like a piece of trash. How could somebody do that?
It's a chilling account, and Jill's tearful delivery seems genuine. But detectives still don't know why on earth would Melinda want Maggie Fetty dead.
The only motive Jill was able to provide to us was that she believed Melinda was, quote, crazy.
Jill says that Melinda suffered from some sort of severe mental illness.
Jill advised us that Melinda was now at Cedar Springs Psychiatric Hospital, that her husband had placed her there on the night of the murder.
Hours later, Kenda and his team are standing in the admitting room at Cedar Springs.
They talked to the staff. Is Melinda Stewart a patient in this facility? Yes, she is. Brought in here yesterday by her husband, who reported that he thought she was having a nervous breakdown.
Detectives ask the hospital staff if they can speak to Melinda. Moments later, out walks a nurse with a disheveled young woman on her arm.
She has every appearance of being someone who is deeply disturbed. Her eyes are wandering. She has difficulty standing.
And the moment Melinda Stewart opens her mouth, it becomes clear the interview is going to be anything but routine.
She looks at one of my detectives, the first one she sees, and says, "Are you dead?"
"17 hours after finding the body of 16-year-old Maggie Fetty, Joe Kenda is closing in on an unlikely murder suspect, 28-year-old Army wife Melinda Stewart. According to mutual friend Jill Youssef, Melinda strangled Maggie to death on Gold Camp Road.
Melinda attacks and kills Maggie for a reason Jill doesn't know.
Then, according to Jill, Melinda forced her to help dispose of Maggie's body. Kenda and his team have tracked Melinda to a local psychiatric hospital. But it's clear from the get-go that interrogating her won't be easy.
She offered up a very childlike demeanor, making statements that almost like a preschooler would talk.
If you're going to talk to somebody like this, are you going to get an intelligent waiver of rights? I'm doubtful of that. But I'm certainly going to try.
We're actually police officers. Can I ask you a few questions?
Okay.
Melinda readily agrees to be interviewed at the hospital, but her bizarre behavior doesn't let up.
She started off with some of her same childlike comments. Maggie's asleep. You know, not saying Maggie's dead, but saying Maggie's asleep.
Kenda plays along, addressing Melinda like a little girl.
Can you tell me how she went to sleep?
Melinda begins to talk about it. Begins to say Maggie is cold. Somebody needs to bring Maggie a coat. She then describes the evening and says that she and Jill and Maggie go up on the Gold Camp Road to drink tequila and look at the city lights. Exactly similar to what Jill says.
But as Melinda's confession continues, Kenda notices a glaring conflict with Jill's version of events.
Jill let me drive.
Melinda says that Melinda is driving the car, and now Jill is in the back seat, so she reverses the positions.
That's not all Melinda reverses.
She then says that they're sitting there in the car, and Jill, for some unknown reason, attacks Maggie with an ace bandage and is strangling her. And Melinda says, I try to stop it, but Jill tells her that she's next if she interferes.
Please don't let her hurt me.
So her story is ultimately the mirror image of Jill's story.
It's not the account Kenda expected. And coming from a woman who's clearly unstable, it's not the most reliable either. Still, Kenda can't help but wonder if Melinda's story could be true.
I'm not a psychiatrist, but I talk to lots of people. Do I think that Melinda's disturbed? Yeah, she is. Does that translate to the personality of a killer? No.
Without a clear idea of what transpired, Kenda can't charge either Jill or Melinda with murder. But he can hold them on charges of obstruction of justice.
At this point, believe them both. And they both stay locked up in the can until we get to more of this.
With Jill and Melinda in custody, detectives need to find a witness who can shed some light on the truth. The best place to start is with Melinda's husband, U.S. Army Sergeant Daniel J. Stewart.
He's been in the Army for some time. He's in an engineering battalion. He builds bridges. Seems to be reasonably intelligent.
Is that him? It looks like him. Sure does.
Sergeant Stewart seems astounded to learn his wife is suspected of murder.
He's very cooperative. He's absolutely. A murder? Oh my God. How could that be true?
Back at the station, Kenda sits down with Sergeant Stewart, hoping he can shed some light on the murder and his wife's unstable mental condition.
So why don't you tell me what happened on Saturday night?
I asked Daniel, what is up with your wife? And he laughs. And he said, oh, you mean her characters?
Dan was the first one to volunteer to us that Melinda had some multiple personality problems.
According to Sergeant Stewart, Kenda hasn't spoken with the real Melinda yet.
I know that sounds crazy, but it's true.
It sounds to him like detectives met Limmy Sue, one of 4 different personas living in Melinda's mind.
She is Melinda Stewart, his wife. She is Amanda von Hofstein. She is a 5-year-old girl named Limmy Sue. And she is a person known as the Clown.
She doesn't have a dangerous bone in her body.
You're sure about that?
Absolutely.
Well, Kenda can't help but wonder if perhaps another character could have emerged the night Maggie was murdered.
Is there a possibility there could be another personality there that might be more violent or dangerous? Or
Not my wife, no. No way.
We asked Dan when Melinda and Jill left, was Melinda herself or was she one of these other people? Oh no, she was herself. She was Melinda. She'd been fine all day.
Sergeant Stewart tells Kenda there was nothing unusual about Melinda's behavior the night of the murder. He and some Army pals had been playing cards when Melinda and Jill decided to have a girls' night out.
You guys have a good night.
Be good.
A few hours later, Melinda and Jill returned.
did you happen to see them when they got back?
I did. Everything seemed fine.
How'd they look?
Okay, nothing out of the ordinary.
They come back, everybody's in a good mood, everybody's happy, no mention of Maggie.
But according to Sergeant Stewart, the next day, Melinda's multiple personalities began to surface, one after another after another.
He said Monday was the last straw. I thought she was having a nervous breakdown, and so I took her into the hospital.
Detectives believe that Melinda's meltdown is connected to the murder. But did Melinda's meltdown cause her to kill? Or did witnessing Maggie's death trigger the meltdown?
Dan believed that Jill Yusuf was the one ultimately responsible for strangling Maddie. He could not believe that his wife would do that.
Even so, Kenda and his team will need more evidence before they can charge either Jill or Melinda with murder. Sergeant Stewart tells detectives that there's someone else they should speak with. His friend, James Catlin.
Who's James Catlin? Well, he's the guy who works with me. He's a boat specialist in the engineering battalion, and he and I work together. He dates Jill off and on.
According to Stewart, the ladies borrowed Catlin's car on the night in question.
Hey, babe. Yeah. Can I get the car keys, please?
Where are you going this late?
We're gonna go up to
You good?
Kenda Road and
You and Melinda?
yeah, we're gonna pick up Maggie.
Later that evening, detectives bring Catlin in for questioning. His account of the evening gels with the one given earlier in the day by Sergeant Stewart.
James Catlin provided a story that was consistent with the information we received during an interview with Daniel Stewart. And that basically was they had no knowledge of anything.
Kenda interviews many of Jill and Melinda's friends, but no one offers any new insights. Privately, he begins to wonder if the true killer will ever come to light.
We're still meeting people, we're still talking to people, we're still not getting very far. So a lot of activity, no results. We just need another hook. I don't know what that is yet, Another piece of information from somebody. Then we get a phone call. That's very interesting. Very interesting indeed.
It's been 2 weeks since police drove up Gold Camp Road and found the lifeless body of teenage runaway Maggie Fetty.
This is a case involving the loneliest, saddest little girl I've met in a long time. She is truly alone in the middle of 300 million people. Who could kill a child violently and personally? If they'll do this to this child, what else will they do?
Lt.Joe Kenda has 2 friends of the victim in custody.
Let's go.
Jill Youssef and Melinda Stewart. Both claim to have witnessed the crime firsthand, but each maintains they saw the other strangle the teenager.
They are telling stories that are the reverse of each other. Which one is true? I don't know. They stay under arrest until we learn more about this.
Finally, on December 17th, detectives receive a tip that could jumpstart the investigation. They get a call from a woman by the name of Penny Rhodes.
She is Melinda's sister. She now wants to talk to the police about what she knows about this.
Penny, who claims that her father was the anonymous tipster, says that she recently spoke to Melinda's husband, Sergeant Dan Stewart.
He did tell her that he had destroyed some of the evidence, some of the clothing that was worn by the 2 individuals on the night of the murder.
I'm looking out for us, I'm looking out for her. I will take care of everything. Everything's fine.
How are you going to take care of it?
So they're all gone, they're all burnt, all the clothing Melinda wore, all the clothing that Joe wore, it was all gone, everything.
How is it going to be okay?
Because I took care of everything. Everything's
You took care of everything.
If no one said anything, then no one would ever know anything.
It's an eye-opening statement, one Sergeant Stewart neglected to mention in his interview. For Kenda, it's also ample cause to book the sergeant for conspiracy after the fact, a rare charge for men of his rank.
Here's a guy who's a sergeant in the United States Army, leader of men, and he is destroying evidence in a murder case. He's accepting a leadership role in a criminal enterprise. He is a liar that has talked to us on more than one occasion. So I'm not only going to arrest him, we're going to confront him.
We arranged for him to come up and be interviewed again. We didn't tell him about the warrant deliberately. We wanted to see what he had to say.
I told you guys.
You've left out quite a bit. We know a lot more than you realize.
Kenda immediately starts asking about Penny Rhodes.
She filled in a lot of details that you failed to mention.
I said she talked to you, didn't she, Dan? And you told her some things. Remember that, Danny? Something you might have overlooked when we talked to you the first time?
And you could see a little revelation in him when that occurred. It's that he was now aware that he needs to start talking.
Sergeant Stewart confesses that shortly after Melinda and Jill came home that night, each woman pulled him aside and informed him of Maggie's murder.
We were just playing it. She got in the car.
Both claiming that the other was responsible. Not knowing who to believe, Stewart collected their clothes and burned the evidence, all to keep his wife out of trouble.
I didn't want Jill to blame Melinda, so I burned their clothes.
You burned evidence to a murder.
And he said, all I did was that. I destroyed that evidence, yes, but I didn't do anything else. Well, Dan, in your case, that's going to be enough. You're under arrest for accessory to crime. So now we've moved from 2 to 3 people in custody, and we still don't know what happened.
Is there anything else you want to tell us, Dan?
Kenda presses Stewart for more witnesses, someone else who was at the apartment that Saturday night, someone who might be able to corroborate Stewart's statement. That's when Stewart blurts out a name, one police haven't heard yet.
He said, well, Silas Nelson was there. Who's he? Well, he's a kid I know in the Army. He's getting out of the Army next month.
Stewart explains that Silas Nelson is a fellow soldier stationed at Fort Carson. But the moment Sergeant Stewart mentions Silas Nelson, he begins to backtrack. He tells Kenda that on second thought, Silas wasn't at his house the night of the crime.
Silas Nelson was not there when the girls went out, when they came back, all that sort of thing. He wasn't around.
For Stewart, it's a slip of the tongue. For Kenda, it's the clue he's been searching for.
You listen very, very carefully when people talk. It's one thing to lie. It's very, very difficult to lie consistently. There are changes. They might be subtle, but they're there. I said, you know, you've always been saying how you didn't know anything about this. And you've always been lying, Danny. You've always been lying.
Kenda sends Sergeant Stewart off for booking and sets out in search of Silas Nelson, hoping the soldier can offer something, anything to bring the investigation back to life. Little does Kenda realize this long-shot witness is about to tear down a web of lies nearly a month in the making.
After all of this, repeated conversations and accusations and so on, we finally get to the bottom of this. This time, it's the truth.
Nearly a month into the search for Maggie Fetty's killer, Joe Kenda has made 3 arrests but little progress.
We have to know the truth, and we're not getting it yet. We're just not getting it.
The crime's 2 prime suspects, Jill Youssef and Melinda Stewart, are still pointing fingers at each other.
You've got 2 women under arrest and in custody. We have them accusing each other of doing that. Do we know who's right? No. We're still at the point of who else can we talk to here?
Melinda Stewart's husband, Sergeant Dan Stewart, has admitted to destroying the clothes the women were wearing the night of the crime. But just before heading off to jail, Sergeant Stewart let slip the name of another possible eyewitness, a fellow soldier by the name of Silas Nelson.
It was provided by Mr. Catlin as an individual that they somewhat hung out with, that had been at their apartment.
Detectives track down Silas Nelson at Fort Carson Army Base and begin to question him.
How you doing? I'm Lieutenant Joe Kenda. For you.
We say, we have a problem here. We've been working a case for several weeks involving some people you know. Daniel Stewart, Melinda Stewart, and Jill. Oh yeah, I know them all.
Nelson tells Kenda that contrary to Dan Stewart's statement, he was at the Stewart's place the night of the murder.
Sir, I actually stayed the whole weekend.
I was there the whole time and never left. So you were there Saturday night? Yes. And you were there Sunday all day? Yes.
It's a shocking revelation, one that calls Sergeant Stewart's whole statement into question.
We asked Nelson, were you there when they came back? No, I went to bed, so I wasn't up when they came home. No. But, boy, I was there before they left. What do you mean? They had quite a conversation. Please continue, Mr. Nelson.
They're talking about this girl.
You know what girl they were talking about?
Her name was Maggie.
He says the girls start yapping about Maggie. Maggie is causing them problems, and they're tired of Maggie, and I'm listening to them. And I'm kind of not believing what I'm hearing, but they're talking about killing her.
And exactly what did they say?
If Nelson is telling the truth, then Maggie's murder wasn't the work of either Jill or Melinda. It was the 2 of them conspiring together.
You see how she looked at him?
It was a very eye-opening interview. Yeah, he had a lot of information to put these 2 parties as part of the conspiracy to commit this crime.
But according to Nelson, Jill and Melinda weren't the only ones talking about killing Maggie.
How would you strangle somebody?
Within minutes, Sergeant Stewart and Sergeant Catlin both joined the conversation.
And he thought it was just a joke. But he said the more I listened, the more I realized they were serious.
You guys want to kill somebody? I can show you how to kill somebody.
According to Nelson, Sergeant Stewart not only assisted in the cover-up of Maggie Fetty's murder, he and Catlin helped orchestrate it as well.
Go ahead.
You are an active participant in the planning of the event. and that makes you chargeable for the crime. You are in this up to your neck.
For Kenda, there are still two lingering questions. Who strangled the teenage runaway, and why? After upgrading Sergeant Stewart's charges to murder, Kenda has Sergeant Catlin arrested, then grills him for answers.
All right, James. We're all done playing games now.
We tell him, this is your opportunity, Catlin, because you're going to go down for this crime. We know a lot more than we did the last time we spoke. Tell us what you know. He finally looks at us and says, everything I told you up to now, throw it all away. I lied about everything.
Maggie was a bad influence, all right?
Sergeant Catlin admits that along with Jill and Melinda, he and Sergeant Stewart knowingly conspired to kill Maggie Fetty.
He openly admitted every one of them had a benefit with the death of Maggie.
According to Sergeant Catlin, Maggie was heavily into drugs. Maggie's destructive behavior started to rub off on Jill and Melinda.
He said she got Jill involved in drugs. I didn't like it when Jill was involved in drugs, so I had no use for Maggie. She would get Melinda involved in drugs, and Dan had no use for that.
Full of surprises.
Sergeant Catlin claims that he tried to shut Maggie out of Jill and Melinda's lives.
You guys into this?
But with Maggie feeding their new drug habit, it was a hard bond to break. Then, just a few days prior to the murder, Maggie gave Jill a tab of LSD that was nearly fatal.
Maggie gets something different for Jill, and Jill gets really sick.
Fine, you can breathe. Stewart! Honey, calm down. Look at me. Calm down.
They are infuriated by this.
What happened to Maggie?
We were getting tired of her being around, you know?
According to Catlin, Jill and Melinda wanted to get even with Maggie. And when they revealed their plan to kill Maggie, the two sergeants jumped at the notion and even gave advice on the best way to do it.
Why don't you show us stuff, guy?
No, I can show you what to do.
He gets this ace bandage, and then Dan and he show the girls how to use it. Stood behind them, showed them how to put pressure, showed them how to pull somebody down using it. After they do that demonstration, they decide they're going to go get Maggie, they're going to take her up on a Gold Camp Road, and they're going to kill her.
As for who physically strangled the teenager, Sergeant Catlin claims that Melinda did the honors.
James ultimately stated that Melinda had told him she was the one who had done the strangling. She's the one that pulled on the ligature and killed Maggie.
For Kenda, it's the key to the whole case, one that finally unlocks the truth about Maggie Fetty's murder.
So after all this information, all these interviews, we discover we're back to almost the original story. They go up on a Gold Camp Road. We now know Jill's driving the car, Melinda's in the back seat. Melinda attacks this girl from behind. Jill is a participant in this crime. She's not trying to save Maggie. When Maggie dies, Jill and Melinda take her out of the car, dump her, throw away the evidence, return to the apartment.
Ultimately, district attorneys arrive at the same conclusion and prosecute all four co-conspirators to the fullest extent of the law.
The evidence was sufficient to show that they all planned it.
They all knew what was going to happen, and they were all involved in it. They were all equally guilty.
But in exchange for reduced charges, Melinda offers testimony against her co-conspirators.
The charge she pled guilty to was second-degree murder, with the stipulated sentence to 48 years in the Colorado Department of Corrections.
Sergeant James Catlin strikes a similar deal, receiving 30 years for second-degree murder. Jill Youssef maintains her innocence all the way to trial.
The jury found her not guilty of murdering Maggie Fetty, but did find her guilty of accessory to murder.
Jill is sentenced to 6 years in prison on the accessory charge. The outcome of Sergeant Daniel Stewart's trial is far different from Jill's.
The jury convicted him of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder.
It's the kind of courtroom victory that usually finds Kenda shaking hands with the victims' families, but not Maggie Fetty's.
After she was dead, nobody ever came knocking on my door. What about my daughter? What are we doing? How do we know what happened? Nothing. No inquiries from the concerned relatives, because there aren't any. We could say to ourselves, we did the right thing here for a girl who desperately needed someone to do something right for her. We were just too late to save her life, but we took punishment against those who took her life.
When the time comes to lay Maggie to rest, no one shows up to handle her funeral arrangements. Kenda and his fellow lawmen do it themselves.
We chipped in and we bought.
The call comes in just after dawn, when the sky over central Florida is still the color of old bruises and the air feels heavy enough to press against the lungs, and the voice on the line is shaking, saying there's something wrong, something very wrong, because the house hasn't moved all night but the silence inside it has, thick and unnatural, like a held breath that never lets go. Patrol cars roll in slow, lights off at first, tires whispering over asphalt still damp from an overnight storm, and when the door is opened the smell hits before the scene does, a sour mix of humidity, metal, and fear that has already begun to settle into the walls. This is how it starts, not with screams or sirens, but with a quiet that doesn't belong. The victim is young, early 20s, the kind of age where life is supposed to feel wide open, photographed often, remembered in snapshots where the smile looks unbreakable. Friends will later say nothing seemed out of place the night before, no threats, no fights, no obvious reason for what happened here. The body lies where it fell, not staged, not hidden, as if whatever tore through this room had no interest in artifice, only in speed and finality. There's no sign of forced entry. No shattered windows. No kicked-in door. Just a house that appears to have let its killer walk right in. Outside, neighbors gather in small knots, voices low, eyes fixed on the flashing lights now cutting through the morning haze. This is a quiet street, the kind where lawns are trimmed on Saturdays and everyone recognizes everyone else's car. A place where crime belongs on television, not behind yellow tape. The shock moves fast, faster than the official statements, faster than the facts. By noon, the word murder is everywhere, spoken in hushed tones, passed along in phone calls and over coffee cups, each retelling adding weight to the fear. Detectives arrive with notebooks already damp from sweat, shirts sticking to their backs as the Florida heat climbs. They photograph everything. The doorway. The floor. The angle of the body. They bag what little there is to bag. A partial print smudged on a surface that could belong to anyone. Fibers that match nothing in any database. No weapon recovered. No clear path in or out. It's a case that immediately feels slippery, like trying to grip water with bare hands. The victim's name fills the local news within hours. A face pulled from social media, smiling into a camera that never saw this ending coming. Reporters crowd the perimeter, microphones angled toward anyone willing to speak. Friends describe a normal life. A job. Plans. A future. Family members stand stiff, eyes hollow, repeating the same phrase again and again, "This doesn't make sense." And they're right. Nothing about it does. Investigators reconstruct the final hours as best they can. Phone records. Credit card swipes. A timeline stitched together from fragments. The victim was last seen alive late in the evening, leaving a familiar place, alone, not followed, not visibly afraid. There's a gap after that, a stretch of time that refuses to give up its secrets. No neighbors heard a struggle. No one saw a stranger. The house sat quietly, blending back into the darkness, while something irreversible unfolded inside. The first theory is the simplest one, because it has to be. Someone the victim knew. Someone trusted. The lack of forced entry points in that direction, and detectives lean into it hard, interviewing friends, co-workers, former partners. Alibis are checked, rechecked, turned upside down. Tensions rise as suspicion spreads through the victim's inner circle, relationships fraying under the pressure of implied blame. But nothing sticks. Stories line up. Timelines hold. Everyone has a place to be that night, witnesses who confirm it, records that back it up. Next comes the idea of a random act, a predator drifting through a quiet neighborhood, unseen, unremembered. It's a terrifying thought, and the community feels it immediately. Doors are locked earlier. Porch lights stay on until morning. Parents watch their children more closely. The sense of safety that once defined the street drains away, replaced by a low-level vigilance that never quite shuts off. Police increase patrols. Tips flood in. None of them lead anywhere solid. Evidence goes to the lab. Days stretch into weeks. The results come back thin. No usable DNA profile. Nothing that matches anyone in the system. It's 2002, and the tools that will one day revolutionize cold case investigations are still more promise than reality. For now, there are limits, and this case runs straight into them. As months pass, the headlines change tone. From breaking news to unanswered questions. From shock to frustration. Detectives rotate on and off the case, each one bringing fresh eyes, each one leaving with the same tight jaw and quiet shake of the head. They lay photos across tables. They pin timelines to corkboards. They argue theories late into the night. A detail that feels important one day collapses under scrutiny the next. Witnesses who once seemed certain begin to doubt their own memories. Did they really see that car? Was it that time, or another night entirely? Memory blurs, and with it goes clarity. The trail cools, then goes cold, the kind of cold that settles deep, not just in files but in people. The victim's family feels it most sharply, the way the world moves on while they remain anchored to a single, unchanging moment. Anniversaries come and go. Each one brings a brief flare of attention. A news segment. A renewed appeal for information. A detective standing in front of a microphone, asking the same question in slightly different words. Someone out there knows something. Someone has held on to a secret for years. The community listens, nods, and then returns to its routines, the unsolved case slipping back into the background noise of life. Inside the police department, the file grows thicker but no clearer. Leads are chased to dead ends. Names are circled, then crossed out. A suspect emerges briefly, only to dissolve under the weight of evidence that refuses to cooperate. The case becomes a reference point, a cautionary tale shared with new detectives, a reminder that not every crime yields to effort and time. The house where it happened changes hands. New residents move in, repaint walls, replace flooring, unaware at first of the history beneath their feet. When they find out, the knowledge settles uneasily, a ghost that doesn't announce itself but never fully leaves. The street looks the same, but it isn't. Everyone remembers. Years pass. Technology advances. Databases expand. Cold cases elsewhere are cracked open, names pulled from obscurity by a single genetic hit, a single overlooked detail. Hope flickers every time another long unsolved crime makes the news. Maybe this will be next. Maybe now there's a way. The victim's family waits, cautious, practiced in disappointment. Investigators revisit the evidence with new tools, new methods. Old samples are re-examined. Files are digitized. A fresh team looks at the timeline, at the gaps that once seemed unavoidable. They ask the same questions again, because sometimes repetition is the only way to notice what was missed. But Florida's humidity has a way of erasing traces, and time has done the rest. What wasn't captured in those first hours is gone for good. The case acquires a label that feels both official and deeply inadequate: cold case. Two words that suggest stillness, finality, when in reality the pain underneath remains very much alive. For the community, it becomes a story told in fragments, a warning passed down, a reminder that the line between ordinary and catastrophic is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And still, somewhere in the unanswered spaces of that night, the truth waits, untouched by headlines or anniversaries, unbothered by the passage of years. The silence that filled the house at dawn has never really lifted. It lingers, stretched across decades, pressing in on anyone who dares to listen too closely, asking the same question over and over again, without mercy, without resolution. The days after the funeral don't feel real, not to the family, not to the detectives, not to the street that keeps waking up to the same Florida sun as if nothing has changed, because grief doesn't announce itself with sirens, it just settles in, quietly, the way humidity does, clinging to everything. The house is sealed now, evidence tape fluttering slightly in the heat, a thin plastic barrier trying and failing to keep the past contained. Inside, the rooms sit frozen, half-lit by blinds pulled at odd angles, dust motes drifting through air that still feels charged, as if the violence that happened here left a residue no amount of time can scrub away. Detectives return again and again, walking the same path from door to hallway to room, forcing themselves to slow down, to look at what they might have rushed past in those first frantic hours. They crouch. They stand. They stare. Every scuff mark becomes a question. Every shadow looks like it could be hiding an answer. But the scene refuses to give anything new. It's as if it has already said all it ever will. They expand the net. Canvassing intensifies. Neighbors are interviewed for the second and third time, their stories now tinged with irritation and fear, because being asked the same questions over and over forces people to confront a possibility they'd rather not consider, that whatever happened here could happen again. A car parked down the block that night, unfamiliar but not suspicious enough to remember clearly. Footsteps may be heard, or may be imagined, sometime after midnight. The details don't line up. They never do. The victim's phone becomes an object of obsession. Messages are read and reread, each line dissected for tone, for subtext, for anything that might hint at danger. There are jokes. Plans. Mundane complaints about work. Nothing that screams impending doom. Call logs show nothing unusual. No frantic last calls. No sudden silences. Just an ordinary digital footprint ending abruptly, like a sentence cut off mid-word. Rumors begin to circulate, filling the vacuum left by the lack of facts. Someone says they heard about a secret relationship. Someone else swears the victim had been arguing with a coworker. Online forums light up, armchair detectives piecing together theories from scraps, confident where the professionals are cautious. Names are floated, reputations bruised, then quietly repaired when nothing comes of it. The case becomes public property, and with that comes distortion. Inside the department, pressure builds. An unsolved murder looks bad on paper, worse on the evening news. Supervisors want progress. The community wants reassurance. The family wants justice. Detectives feel all of it pressing down at once, and they respond the only way they know how, by working longer hours, by chasing leads that feel thin even as they dial the number. They question. They re-question. They eliminate possibilities one by one, the list of what didn't happen growing longer than the list of what did. A potential suspect emerges months in, a figure pulled from the victim's past, someone with a history that makes the theory tempting. There are whispers of resentment, of unresolved conflict. Detectives bring him in, the room small, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He sits stiffly, eyes darting, hands clenched in his lap. The questions come fast, then slow, then fast again. He denies everything. His alibi is shaky at first, then solidifies as records surface, timestamps and witnesses aligning just enough to let him walk out the door. Another door closing. Another possibility gone. The lab results, when they come, are a study in frustration. Samples degraded. Profiles incomplete. The technology can only do so much with what it's given, and what it's given is barely there. It's a reminder that timing matters in investigations, that the first hours are unforgiving, that some opportunities, once missed, never come back. As the first-year anniversary approaches, the mood shifts again. There's a vigil, candles flickering in the warm night air, faces illuminated by soft light and shared sadness. Speeches are made. Promises renewed. Detectives stand at the edge of the crowd, not in uniform, blending in, listening. They feel the weight of expectation in every glance thrown their way. This case is no longer just a file. It's a wound that refuses to close. Behind the scenes, resources begin to thin. New cases come in, fresh crimes demanding immediate attention. The cold arithmetic of policing takes over. Time is finite. Manpower limited. The unsolved murder doesn't disappear, but it gets pushed back, revisited between emergencies, worked on when there's room to breathe. The file moves from the top of the pile to the middle, then lower still. Years creep by. The street grows older. Kids who once rode bikes past the house are now driving. New families move in, unaware at first of the story attached to their address. When they learn it, reactions vary. Some are unsettled. Others shrug, convinced that whatever happened is long over, locked in the past. The idea that the killer was never caught sits uneasily, but life has a way of dulling even sharp fears. Inside storage rooms, evidence boxes gather dust. The case number fades on the spine of a thick binder. But it's not forgotten. Not entirely. Every so often, a detective pulls it out, flipping through pages yellowed at the edges, trying to see it with fresh eyes. They notice small things. A note scribbled in the margin. A witness statement that didn't seem important at the time. They follow up. Usually, it leads nowhere. Sometimes, it leads back to the same conclusions they reached years ago. The victim's family ages with the case. Grief changes shape, from raw pain to a constant, low-level ache. They learn to live around it, but it never leaves. They mark time in court dates that never happen, in calls that never come. They become experts in disappointment, bracing themselves whenever the phone rings with an unfamiliar number. Then, quietly, the world changes. DNA technology advances. Databases grow. Genetic genealogy makes headlines, turning family trees into investigative tools. Cold cases from the 70s and 80s suddenly crack open, suspects identified decades too late to undo the damage but just in time to name it. Each story reignites hope, not just for the public, but for the detectives who never stopped thinking about their own unsolved cases. The Florida file is pulled again. Evidence once deemed useless is re-examined under new protocols. Analysts work carefully, aware that this might be the last chance to coax anything meaningful from samples long past their prime. Weeks pass. Then months. The waiting is familiar, but the stakes feel higher now. This isn't just another test. It's a line between closure and permanent uncertainty. When results finally arrive, they are partial. Not enough to point to a name. Enough to suggest a direction, a possibility that hadn't existed before. It's both exhilarating and cruel, a door cracked open just wide enough to see light on the other side, but not wide enough to step through. Investigators debate their next move, resources weighed against odds, hope balanced against realism. The case officially becomes a cold case unit responsibility, a designation that sounds clinical but carries emotional weight. It means persistence without urgency, diligence without guarantees. It means working a murder that time has tried to erase. The detectives assigned to it understand that. They accept it. They add the file to their rotation, another ghost demanding attention. Public interest spikes briefly when the reassignment is announced. Headlines resurface. Old photos reappear on screens. Tips come in again, some sincere, some strange, some clearly fueled by imagination. Each one is logged. Each one is checked. None of them break the case open. And still, the central mystery remains untouched. Who entered that house? Why? How they left without being seen? How they managed to slip through the cracks of an investigation that spanned years, technology shifts, and dozens of determined professionals. The questions pile up, unanswered, heavy. By the time the 10th anniversary arrives, the case has taken on a strange dual existence. For the outside world, it's a story from the past, occasionally referenced, rarely felt. For those closest to it, it's ever present, a constant companion. The silence from that morning in 2002 still echoes, stretching forward, refusing to fade, daring anyone listening to claim that this story is over. Time does strange things to unsolved murders. It blurs edges, softens outrage, turns urgency into routine, but it also sharpens certain moments until they feel frozen, preserved in the minds of the people who were there when everything first broke. For the detectives who inherit the Florida 2002 case, the first task isn't solving it, it's learning it, absorbing years of dead ends and half answers, reading reports written by people who have since retired, transferred, or died, trying to hear the echoes of instincts that once felt strong enough to follow. They sit in quiet offices late at night, flipping pages, staring at crime scene photos that no longer feel shocking, just deeply sad, and they ask themselves the same question every investigator asks when faced with a cold case: what did they miss? They rebuild the timeline from scratch, not trusting the assumptions that hardened into fact over time. The night is laid out minute by minute. When the victim left. When they were last seen. When the house went dark. When the first call came in. Small gaps appear, places where the clock is silent, where certainty gives way to approximation. These gaps become magnets for attention. Maybe something happened here. Maybe someone noticed something but didn't understand its importance until it was too late. They go back to the neighbors, some of whom barely remember being interviewed the first time. Lives have moved on. Faces have changed. Memories are softer now, less reliable, but occasionally more honest. One neighbor mentions a sound they dismissed at the time, a dull thud, maybe a door closing harder than usual. Another recalls a car idling briefly near the curb, not speeding away, just sitting there, engine low, before pulling off calmly. Details that once seemed meaningless now feel loaded, dangerous with possibility. The investigators map out similar crimes from the early 2000s, searching for patterns that weren't visible before. Unsolved cases. Single victims. No forced entry. Minimal evidence. Florida has no shortage of violence, but patterns are rare, and coincidence is a constant enemy. A case from another county draws attention for a moment, then falls apart under scrutiny. Different circumstances. Different signatures. Another almost, another maybe, another nothing. The victim's personal life is re-examined with a colder lens. Not to assign blame, but to understand context. Relationships are revisited. Old arguments are replayed. Words spoken casually years ago are now weighed like confessions. Friends are contacted again, some reluctantly, some with a surprising eagerness to help, as if they've been waiting for the chance to talk, to unburden themselves of thoughts they've carried quietly for years. But even here, the answers don't line up neatly. There is no clear threat. No obvious enemy. No moment where everything suddenly clicks. As the investigation digs deeper into the past, it collides with an uncomfortable truth. People lie better with time. Stories evolve. Alibis improve. What was once a vague recollection becomes a polished narrative, repeated so often it feels true even if it isn't. Detectives know this, and they push, gently but persistently, testing inconsistencies, watching body language, listening for hesitation. Most interviews end the same way they always have, with polite goodbyes and a quiet sense of frustration. Media interest flickers back to life as the renewed investigation becomes public. Headlines talk about new eyes and fresh hope, careful not to promise too much. The victim's photo appears again on screens, unchanged by time, forever young, forever frozen in a moment before everything went wrong. Viewers call in tips sparked by memory or imagination, convinced they recognize the face, the case, the story. Some swear they saw something years ago. Some offer names, vague descriptions, theories stitched together from other crimes. Each call is logged. Each one chips away at hours that could be spent elsewhere. Behind closed doors, investigators wrestle with doubt. Is this case solvable, or are they chasing a ghost created by circumstance and decay? The evidence is thin. The years are many. But walking away feels like surrender, and surrender isn't something they're trained to do. They remind themselves that time doesn't always protect the guilty, that secrets have a way of slipping out when people least expect it. A breakthrough almost happens when an old witness statement is revisited, one that was deemed unreliable years ago due to inconsistencies. The witness had been under the influence that night, their memory questioned, their credibility dismissed. Now, with distance, detectives see it differently. Not as truth, but as a fragment. The statement mentions a figure near the house, someone who didn't belong, someone watching rather than moving. It's vague, unsettling, and impossible to verify. Still, it's enough to justify a new line of inquiry. They chase it cautiously, cross-referencing descriptions, checking old arrest records, scanning databases for anyone who might fit. The search yields a handful of possibilities: men who lived nearby at the time, men with histories that raise eyebrows. Interviews follow. Doors open reluctantly. Some faces show fear. Others show boredom. All deny involvement. Without evidence, the questions go nowhere. The case begins to exert a quiet psychological toll on those working it. Cold cases have a way of doing that, pulling investigators into a past they can't change, forcing them to live with unresolved endings. One detective admits to dreaming about the house, about walking its rooms and finding something new each time, something just out of reach when awake. Another keeps the victim's photo pinned above his desk, not as motivation, but as a reminder of why the work matters, even when it feels futile. Years continue their slow march forward. Technology advances again. Databases expand. Algorithms improve. There is talk of reprocessing evidence yet again, of using tools that didn't exist even a few years earlier. The problem remains the same: the evidence itself hasn't changed. It's old. It's degraded. It's incomplete. You can't extract answers that were never captured in the first place. The family is kept informed, carefully, gently. Updates are given without promises. They listen, nodding, asking measured questions, guarding themselves against hope that might collapse tomorrow. They have learned the language of investigations, the meaning behind phrases like ongoing review and no new developments at this time. They understand that effort does not guarantee results, but understanding doesn't make the waiting easier. The house, long since remodeled, stands quietly, unaware of the attention it still receives from people who drive by too slowly, glancing at it with curiosity or unease. New owners live ordinary lives inside it, cooking dinners, watching television, unaware that their walls once absorbed screams no one heard. The past is invisible, but it isn't gone. Then comes another anniversary, another brief spike in attention. A local news station airs a segment, dramatic music underscoring images of police tape and old photographs. A detective speaks on camera, measured and calm, asking once again for anyone with information to come forward. The words are familiar. The plea is sincere. The silence afterward is deafening. As the segment airs, somewhere out there, someone watches. Maybe they change the channel. Maybe they linger, heart racing, recognizing details they've tried to forget. Or maybe no one does, and the story simply folds back into the background noise of unsolved crimes that litter the country, each one a reminder of how imperfect justice can be. Within the cold case unit, the Florida 2002 file remains active, technically alive, even as progress stalls. Detectives refuse to close it, knowing that closure without truth is just another kind of lie. They keep notes. They keep looking. They keep asking themselves the same question that has haunted this case from the beginning: how does someone kill, disappear, and leave behind almost nothing? The answer, if it exists, is buried somewhere in the spaces between what was seen and what was missed, between memory and reality, between then and now. The case endures, not because it is loud or famous, but because it is unresolved, and unresolved things have a way of lingering, pressing against the present, demanding attention. The silence from that Florida morning stretches on, unchanged, wrapping itself around every new lead, every renewed effort, every quiet failure. It doesn't offer clues. It doesn't care about time. It simply waits, patient and heavy, for someone, somewhere, to finally say the one thing this case has never heard. Cold cases don't announce when they're about to shift. There's no dramatic phone call, no sudden alignment of stars. Change, when it comes at all, arrives quietly, disguised as routine. In this case, it begins with paperwork. Old evidence logs pulled from storage. Chain of custody forms reviewed line by line. A junior analyst notices something small, almost insulting in its simplicity, a discrepancy in how one item was catalogued years ago, not wrong enough to raise alarms back then, just imprecise enough to invite a second look now. It's not a breakthrough. It's barely even a lead. But in a case like this, small things matter. The item is re-examined, handled with exaggerated care, because everyone in the room understands how fragile this moment is. The sample has been touched before, tested before, dismissed before. It carries the quiet weight of expectations it cannot possibly meet. Still, the process moves forward. New machines hum softly. Screens glow. Data scrolls. Hours pass in a silence broken only by keyboard taps and the low murmur of technical terms. When the results appear, they don't offer a name, but they offer shape. A partial profile. Incomplete, imperfect, but real. It's enough to reopen conversations that had long been closed. Investigators gather, some familiar with the case, some only just learning its contours. They talk through possibilities, cautious not to let optimism outrun evidence. A partial profile can be a gift or a curse. It can narrow a search or send it spiraling outward. Here, it does both. It suggests the presence of someone previously unconsidered, someone outside the victim's immediate circle, someone who slipped through earlier filters because there was nothing concrete to catch on. Attention shifts outward. Old geographic data is revisited. Who lived nearby in 2002? Who passed through? Who worked odd hours? Who vanished from the area shortly after the murder, not dramatically, not suspiciously, just quietly enough to be missed? Lists are built, then trimmed, then rebuilt. Addresses are cross-checked against employment records, vehicle registrations, old arrest logs. It's slow, grinding work, the kind that rarely makes headlines. Some names spark brief interest. A man who lived 3 streets over, moved away abruptly. Another with a history of petty crime, nothing violent, nothing that screams murderer, but patterns don't always announce themselves loudly. Interviews are conducted, careful and methodical. Time has changed these people. Hairlines receded. Voices deepened. Lives layered with years of distance from that night. Most react with confusion when asked about a murder they barely remember hearing about. Some react with irritation. A few react with something harder to read. One interview stands out not because of what's said, but because of what isn't. The subject answers questions politely, too politely, as if following a script rehearsed long ago. His timeline is smooth, unbroken, almost elegant in its simplicity. He remembers where he was, who he was with, what he was doing. He remembers it all a little too well. Investigators notice. They always do. But noticing isn't enough. Without evidence, suspicion remains just that, a feeling without teeth. The partial DNA profile is run through every database available. Local. State. Federal. Nothing hits. No match. No flag. It's another reminder that databases only work if the right people are in them, and the absence of a record can mean innocence or simply luck. The frustration is palpable, but it's tempered now by something else: persistence. The case has survived worse dead ends than this. Outside the department, the story resurfaces again, prompted by a quiet leak about renewed forensic work. Headlines are cautious, hedging every word. New testing in old Florida murder. Cold case sees movement. The public reacts with a familiar mix of curiosity and skepticism. People have heard this before. They've been promised progress before. Still, the victim's name trends locally, memories stirred, conversations revived. The family hears about the developments through official channels first, as protocol demands. A detective sits across from them, voice measured, eyes careful. He explains what they have and, more importantly, what they don't. No suspect. No arrest. Just new information. The family listens, nodding, absorbing the update with practiced restraint. Hope flickers, controlled, contained, like a flame shielded from wind. Investigators turn their attention to behavioral analysis, reconstructing the crime not as a puzzle of evidence but as an act carried out by a human being with motives and habits. The lack of forced entry suggests familiarity or confidence. The speed suggests intent. The absence of staging suggests panic or indifference. Profiles are built, debated, adjusted. None of them feel complete. None of them feel wrong either. The house itself becomes a focal point again. Not the structure as it stands now, renovated and ordinary, but the version frozen in photographs from 2002. Floor plans are studied. Sightlines considered. Where could someone have stood without being seen from the street? How quickly could they have moved from entry to exit? What sounds would have carried? What wouldn't? The exercise is grim, but necessary. It grounds theory in space, in physics, in reality. A former neighbor, tracked down after years of silence, offers a detail that hadn't surfaced before, not because it was hidden, but because no one thought to ask the question that would unlock it. He mentions a man he saw occasionally back then, not living on the street, just visiting, parking briefly, leaving. A forgettable presence, the kind of person your brain edits out. He can't remember the face clearly. Just the posture. The way he moved. It's not much. It's barely anything. But it's new. Sketch artists get involved, working from vague descriptions, knowing the limitations, knowing the result will be more suggestion than likeness. The sketch circulates quietly at first, shared among departments, then released publicly with careful language. The response is immediate and chaotic. Tips pour in. People see resemblances everywhere. An ex-boyfriend. A coworker. A stranger from the grocery store. Each call is logged. Each one requires follow-up. Most go nowhere. Some lead to awkward conversations. One leads to an interview that raises eyebrows but ultimately collapses under scrutiny. The process is exhausting, cyclical, emotionally draining. Investigators remind themselves that volume is part of the game, that clarity often hides among noise. As months turn into another year, momentum slows again. Not because the case is abandoned, but because it resists acceleration. Every path forward requires time, permission, resources. Cold cases move at the speed of bureaucracy and chance, not desire. Detectives juggle it alongside fresh crimes, switching mental gears daily, carrying the weight of unresolved violence into new scenes, new tragedies. Privately, some begin to question whether the partial DNA profile will ever yield more than it already has. It's a ghost of evidence, present but insubstantial. Still, they hold on to it, because letting go would feel like giving up the one tangible thread they've managed to pull from the past. The community, once rattled, has settled into a cautious equilibrium. The murder is remembered, but it no longer dominates conversation. New scandals, new fears, new distractions have taken its place. Only on quiet nights does it resurface, in the minds of those who remember the street before and after, who still glance a little too long at passing cars, who still lock their doors with an extra check. Inside the department, the case file grows again, not thicker with answers, but heavier with effort. Notes accumulate. Hypotheses evolve. The story of the crime becomes layered, complex, full of possibilities that refuse to collapse into certainty. It's a living thing now, changing shape with every new interpretation, every technological shift. And somewhere within that shifting mass of information, the truth remains, intact and unreachable, like an object sunk just beyond visibility in dark water. Detectives know it's there. They feel its pull. But knowing and reaching are two very different things. The Florida heat keeps rising and falling with the seasons. Years mark themselves quietly, and the case, still officially unsolved, continues to breathe in the background, steady and unresolved, waiting for the moment when patience, technology, and chance finally align, or don't. By the time the case reaches its second decade, it has outlived assumptions. The idea that time alone would loosen tongues or surface mistakes has proven optimistic at best, naive at worst. What remains now is endurance, a kind of investigative stamina that has less to do with breakthroughs and more to do with refusal. Refusal to close the file. Refusal to let the victim become just another name archived under unsolved. Inside the cold case unit, the Florida 2002 murder is no longer discussed in terms of solving it quickly, but in terms of keeping it alive. A new generation of detectives takes its turn with the case, bringing with them a different mindset, shaped by years of watching old crimes collapse under the weight of new tools. They approach the file not as a mystery to be cracked in one decisive moment, but as a landscape to be mapped, inch by inch. They digitize everything. Old interview tapes are converted, cleaned, enhanced. Voices recorded on outdated equipment are listened to again, words slowed down, pauses examined, the space between sentences treated as potential evidence. Patterns are reconsidered. Not patterns of violence, but patterns of omission. What wasn't asked? What wasn't followed up on? Which names appeared once and then vanished from the record. It's tedious work, the kind that doesn't reward intuition, only patience. And patience, in this case, has already been tested beyond reason. One detective becomes fixated on timing. Not the broad timeline everyone knows, but the microtiming, the minutes that slipped by unnoticed. He overlays cell tower data from 2002 onto modern mapping software, adjusting for outdated infrastructure, trying to reconstruct movement with a precision that simply didn't exist back then. The results aren't clean. Towers overlapped. Pings were inconsistent. Still, shapes begin to form. Routes that make sense. Routes that don't. Another investigator focuses on access. Who had reason to be near the house without drawing attention? Utility workers. Delivery drivers. Contractors. People whose presence wouldn't trigger suspicion. Records are incomplete, many long destroyed or lost. Names are hard to track. Companies dissolved. Employees scattered. It's a rabbit hole with no clear bottom, but it opens a new way of thinking about the crime, one that shifts focus away from personal motive and toward opportunity. The partial DNA profile remains the silent anchor of the case, always present, always just out of reach. Advances in genetic genealogy offer renewed hope, but they also introduce complications. The sample is weak. The risk of contamination is real. Ethical questions loom. Decisions have to be made carefully, deliberately, because one misstep could render the evidence useless forever. Committees meet. Experts weigh in. Time stretches. When approval finally comes to attempt genealogical analysis, expectations are managed tightly. No one promises miracles. The process begins quietly, shielded from media attention, because public pressure can distort even the most careful work. Analysts upload what they can, aware that the result might be nothing, that the digital net might come back empty once again. Weeks pass. Then months. The waiting feels different this time, heavier somehow, because the stakes are higher. This isn't just another reprocessing. It's the edge of what science can do with what remains. If this fails, there are no obvious next steps, no new angles waiting in reserve. When the initial report arrives, it doesn't deliver a name. It delivers distance. A cluster. A faint constellation of shared markers pointing toward a family line, not close enough to identify a suspect, but close enough to suggest one exists somewhere out there, connected by blood, separated by choices. It's progress, but it's the slow kind, the kind that demands more work rather than less. Genealogists begin building trees, tracing branches backward and outward, following records that fade the further they go. Birth certificates. Marriage licenses. Census data. The past unfolds in layers, revealing migrations, splits, forgotten relatives. It's painstaking, and every assumption has to be checked, because one wrong branch can send the entire effort off course. As the tree grows, investigators watch for alignment. Someone in the right age range. In the right place. At the right time. Most branches dead end. Some lead to people long deceased. Others lead to lives that don't intersect with Florida at all. But one line keeps circling back to the state, to the region, to a period that overlaps uncomfortably well with the crime. The name at the center of that line isn't new. It's not circled in red ink in the old files. It's not highlighted or flagged. It appears once, maybe twice, buried in ancillary reports, a background figure mentioned in passing, never elevated to suspect status. Someone who existed at the edges of the investigation without ever stepping fully into the light. Investigators tread carefully. This isn't probable cause. It's not even suspicion in the legal sense. It's a possibility, a hypothesis supported by math and chance more than direct evidence. They begin quietly, verifying basics. Where was this person in 2002? Where did they live? What did they do? The answers come back slowly, but when they do, they're unsettling in their normalcy. The individual lived within a reasonable distance of the house. Had access to transportation. Worked irregular hours. No violent criminal history. Nothing that would have triggered alarms 20 years ago. And yet, when the timeline is laid over his known movements, the gaps are there. not incriminating on their own, but present. Waiting. Surveillance begins, not because of certainty, but because of responsibility. Detectives watch from a distance, learning habits, routines, the rhythms of a life lived largely unnoticed. They're struck by how ordinary it all looks. This is the hardest part of cold case work, the confrontation with the idea that the person responsible for something horrific might blend seamlessly into everyday life, carrying groceries, making small talk, existing without visible consequence. Eventually, there's an interview. Not an interrogation. Not yet. Just a conversation, framed as routine, about the past, about where life has gone since the early 2000s. The subject agrees, perhaps curious, perhaps confident, perhaps unaware of how the ground beneath him has shifted. He sits across from detectives in a room that feels too familiar, too much like every other interview conducted over the years. He remembers 2002 vaguely, remembers the area, remembers hearing about the murder, maybe. His answers are calm, measured. He doesn't appear nervous. If anything, he seems almost relieved to talk, to fill the space with words. Detectives listen carefully, not just to what he says, but to how he says it. The pacing. The deflections. The moments where detail sharpens unexpectedly. They ask for a DNA sample. Casually. Procedurally. He hesitates, just briefly, before agreeing. It's a moment so small it could be dismissed entirely, but in a case like this, small moments are everything. The sample is collected. Labeled. Sent off. Another wait begins. During that wait, the weight of the case presses in again. This is the point where hope becomes dangerous. Where imagination runs ahead of evidence. Investigators remind themselves that many cold cases have reached this stage before, only to collapse. They prepare for that possibility, tempering expectations, guarding against disappointment. When the results come back, they don't shout. They don't declare victory. They speak in the careful language of science, of probability and exclusion. The sample does not exclude him. It is consistent with the partial profile recovered from the scene. Not a definitive match. Not yet. But no longer a ghost either. The room goes quiet as the implications settle. After years of abstraction, of theories and distance, the case has narrowed to a human scale again. A name. A face. A life that intersects, however faintly, with the moment everything changed. It's not enough for an arrest. It's not enough for closure. But it's closer than the case has ever been. Outside, life continues, indifferent to the quiet shift happening behind closed doors. The community doesn't know. The family doesn't know. Not yet. The investigators sit with the knowledge, understanding that the path ahead is still long, still fragile. One misstep could unravel everything. One assumption could poison the outcome. The Florida 2002 case, still officially unsolved, has moved again, just slightly, like a locked door giving way under sustained pressure. It hasn't opened. But it has yielded. And for the first time in a long time, the silence surrounding that morning feels thinner, less absolute, as if it might finally be preparing to break. The problem with getting close in a cold case is that closeness changes everything. Distance allows theory. Proximity demands proof. Once a name exists, once a face replaces abstraction, every decision carries weight, legal and moral, and the margin for error collapses to almost nothing. The detectives working the Florida 2002 case feel that shift immediately. Conversations grow quieter. Emails become carefully worded. The file, once handled freely, now moves with deliberate caution, because this is the phase where cases are lost as often as they are won. They go back to the beginning again, this time with the suspect's life threaded through the timeline like a faint watermark. Where was he living exactly? Not just the city, but the address. Who lived with him? Who saw him regularly? What routes he would have taken to work, to stores, to anywhere that might have placed him near the victim's house without drawing attention. Maps fill whiteboards. Old aerial photos are pulled up, showing the neighborhood as it looked 2 decades earlier, before new developments, before streets were widened, before memory and landscape drifted apart. The suspect's employment history becomes critical. Records show irregular hours, late shifts, early finishes, a schedule that changes just enough to create opportunity without leaving obvious gaps. Co-workers from that time are tracked down, their recollections uneven, softened by time. Some barely remember him at all. Others recall him as quiet, reliable, forgettable. No red flags. No stories of violence. The absence of warning signs is unsettling, but it's also familiar. Most people who commit singular acts of extreme violence don't advertise it. Investigators dig into his personal relationships circa 2002. Friends. Romantic partners. Casual acquaintances. The question isn't motive yet, it's capacity. Emotional state. Stressors. Losses. Triggers. There are hints of instability, nothing dramatic, nothing criminal. A breakup. Financial pressure. A sense of drifting. Common problems, the kind millions of people experience without harming anyone. The detectives know better than to overinterpret. Context matters, but it isn't destiny. The DNA results, still short of definitive, sit at the center of every discussion. Consistent is not the same as conclusive. Defense attorneys live in that space. So do appeals courts. The team knows that if this ever goes to trial, every word will be scrutinized, every assumption challenged. They need more. Something independent. Something that doesn't rely on a degraded sample and statistical probability. They revisit physical evidence one more time, this time asking different questions. Not who left this here, but how. Fibers are reconsidered in light of the suspect's known clothing preferences at the time. Shoe impressions, once too vague to be useful, are compared against old purchase records, brand popularity in the region, manufacturing patterns from the early 2000s. It's forensic archaeology, reconstructing meaning from fragments everyone else already gave up on. A small detail resurfaces from an early report, overlooked because it didn't seem relevant then. A neighbor had mentioned a faint smell that night, something unusual but not alarming enough to call in. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't gas. Just something off. At the time, it was written off as environmental, Florida being Florida. Now, investigators wonder if it could point to a cleaning agent, a hurried attempt to erase something. The theory is thin, but it prompts a new line of inquiry. They look into the suspect's access to certain products, certain tools, certain substances. Not because possession implies guilt, but because absence might exclude him. The trail is cold. Records from that time are sparse. Receipts long gone. Memories unreliable. Still, the act of asking sharpens focus. It forces the case into specifics rather than abstractions. Surveillance continues, restrained but persistent. The suspect goes about his life unaware of how closely it's being observed, or perhaps aware and choosing to ignore it. He doesn't flee. He doesn't act erratically. If anything, he seems grounded, rooted, the kind of stability that can either reassure or unsettle depending on what you're looking for. Detectives debate this endlessly. Would a guilty man have cracked by now? Would an innocent one show more anger at being scrutinized? There are no clean answers. The family is still kept at arm's length from these developments, a decision made to protect both the investigation and them. They know the case is active. They know work is being done. They don't know how close it might be, or how fragile that closeness is. Every update is a careful balancing act between transparency and restraint, between hope and caution. Internally, prosecutors are consulted, not formally, but enough to test the waters. The response is predictable. Interesting, but not ready. Promising, but insufficient. They need a narrative that holds together under pressure, one that doesn't collapse if a single piece is challenged. Circumstantial cases can succeed, but only when the circumstances form a tight, unbroken chain. Right now, there are gaps. One of those gaps is motive. Investigators don't know why the victim would have opened the door for this person, or how he would have entered without force if they didn't. Theories multiply. Mistaken identity. Opportunistic entry. A chance encounter that escalated. Each explanation fits some facts and contradicts others. None feel complete. They attempt a second interview, this time more focused, more deliberate. The suspect agrees again, his demeanor unchanged. Questions circle closer to the night in question, probing memory, testing consistency. There are small discrepancies now, tiny shifts in phrasing, moments where certainty gives way to approximation. It's subtle. It could be nothing. Or it could be the erosion of a rehearsed narrative under pressure. When confronted gently with inconsistencies, he shrugs them off, attributing them to the passage of time. It's a reasonable defense. 20 years distort memory for everyone. The interview ends without confrontation, without accusation. As he leaves, detectives exchange glances that say what words can't. They feel closer, but they're not there yet. Meanwhile, genealogists continue refining their work, pushing the family tree outward, narrowing possibilities, eliminating branches. The math becomes more confident. The statistical likelihood that the DNA belongs to someone in this specific line increases. It's still not courtroom ready, but it's no longer speculative either. The science is pointing, steadily, insistently, in one direction. Pressure builds behind the scenes. Not from the public, but from within. Resources are finite. Cold cases compete with each other for attention, and administrators want to know whether this one is moving toward resolution or hovering indefinitely in the gray zone. Detectives argue for patience. For time. For one more step. They've come too far to rush now. The suspect's digital footprint is examined, not just from the present, but retroactively. Old email accounts. Archived data. Anything recoverable from early internet usage. The results are limited, but patterns emerge. Interests. Habits. A tendency to lurk rather than engage. It doesn't prove anything. It adds texture, not clarity. There's a moment, late one night, when a detective sits alone in the office, staring at the suspect's photo beside the victim's. Two faces from different worlds, linked by a night neither of them could have predicted. He wonders, not for the first time, whether certainty is an illusion, whether even a conviction would truly explain what happened here. Violence often resists narrative. It just happens, leaving everyone else to make sense of the aftermath. As weeks turn into months, the investigation edges forward without crossing the line into action. Every move is deliberate. Every decision weighed. This is the slowest part of the process, the part the public rarely sees, where cases are won or lost not by drama but by discipline. The detectives know that if they act too soon, they risk everything. If they wait too long, evidence might slip away again. The Florida heat rolls through another summer. The house stands unchanged. The street hums with ordinary life. Somewhere in that ordinary flow, the past is pressing closer to the present, drawn forward by persistence, by science, by a refusal to let silence be the final word. The case is no longer frozen. It's moving, cautiously, deliberately, like something waking up after a long, uneasy sleep. And as it moves, it carries with it the weight of years, the expectations of a family, and the quiet, dangerous question that now hangs over everything. What happens when suspicion finally demands an answer? Momentum in a long-dead case never arrives cleanly. It leaks in through cracks, builds pressure quietly, and then forces decisions no one feels ready to make. In the Florida 2002 investigation, that pressure begins to show in small ways first. Meetings last longer. Voices lower when certain names are mentioned. The suspect's file, once thin and unassuming, now sits permanently on desks, pages flagged, margins crowded with notes. He is no longer a hypothetical. He is a presence. Detectives begin re-interviewing people connected to him, not just from 2002, but across the years that followed. Former partners. Old co-workers. Casual acquaintances who drifted out of his life without ceremony. These conversations are framed carefully, not as accusations, but as routine follow-ups in a long-running case. Most respondents are surprised, some confused. A few show visible discomfort at hearing his name again, not because they suspect him of murder, but because memory has a way of dragging up things people thought they'd buried. Patterns emerge slowly. Not violent ones. Behavioral ones. Emotional distance. A tendency to disappear when things became complicated. Stories of sudden moves, abrupt endings to relationships, a habit of cutting ties rather than confronting conflict. None of it proves anything. But it sketches a personality that aligns too neatly with the crime's defining feature, someone who entered, acted, and vanished without leaving much behind. The suspect himself remains cooperative on the surface. He answers calls, returns messages, maintains the same calm tone he's used from the start. But investigators notice changes. He asks more questions now. Wants to know how long this will continue. Mentions stress. Mentions feeling watched. It's subtle, but the balance has shifted. He knows, on some level, that this is no longer random. The DNA conversation becomes unavoidable. Prosecutors revisit the data with fresh eyes, pushing analysts to explain margins, probabilities, error rates. Could this hold up? Could it survive cross-examination? The answers are cautious. It strengthens a case. It does not stand alone. Everyone in the room understands what that means. One more piece is needed. Something human. Something tangible. Investigators return to the victim's final day, zooming in tighter than ever before. Not hours. Minutes. Who could have crossed paths with her without registering as a threat? Who would have seemed ordinary enough to open a door for? They rewatch old security footage from nearby businesses, grainy and incomplete, but not entirely useless. Shapes pass through frames. Faces blur. One figure appears briefly at the edge of relevance, a man whose height and gait resemble the suspect's, moving through an area that aligns with the timeline. It's not definitive. It's not even clear. But it's there. They enhance the footage as much as technology allows. The result is haunting rather than helpful. A ghost of a person, captured just long enough to suggest presence, not long enough to confirm identity. Still, it reinforces a growing sense among the team that this crime was not as invisible as it once seemed. It left traces. Just not obvious ones. The question of entry returns with renewed force. Investigators test theories physically now, walking the neighborhood at night, recreating lighting conditions from 2002, listening for how sound travels. They discover something unsettling. From a certain angle, at a certain time, the front of the house would have appeared darker than the street, obscuring anyone standing just inside the doorway. A person could have been there, talking quietly, unseen by neighbors only yards away. Opportunity sharpens into plausibility. One detective revisits an early witness statement that mentioned a brief conversation heard through an open window, words indistinct, tone calm. At the time, it was dismissed as unrelated, everyday noise in a residential area. Now, it lands differently. Calm doesn't mean safe. Calm can be a mask. They attempt a controlled pressure tactic, subtle but intentional. The suspect is informed that forensic work has progressed. No details. Just enough to let his imagination fill the gaps. His reaction is measured, but not neutral. He asks if he needs a lawyer. He asks if he's being accused. The answer is no. Not yet. But the seed has been planted. Days later, an unexpected development surfaces. A former acquaintance contacts investigators after seeing renewed coverage of the case. She hesitates at first, her voice tight, as if weighing consequences. She says there's something she's never been comfortable with, something small but persistent. A comment he made years ago, offhand, during a conversation about crime. A remark about how easy it is to enter a house if you look like you belong there. At the time, she thought it was strange. Now, it feels heavier. Her statement is taken carefully, corroborated where possible. It's circumstantial. Subjective. But it adds a human thread to a case built largely on fragments and science. Prosecutors listen closely this time. They don't dismiss it. They don't embrace it either. They place it on the growing pile of maybes that is slowly becoming something more solid. The investigation reaches a quiet crossroads. Enough pieces exist to suggest a story. Not enough to force the ending. Detectives debate next steps intensely. Another interview risks alerting the suspect too much. Waiting risks losing momentum. They choose a middle path. They keep watching. Keep listening. Keep tightening the net without letting it snap shut prematurely. The suspect's behavior shifts again. He withdraws slightly, misses a call, cancels a meeting. When he reappears, he's defensive in a way he wasn't before, careful with words, cautious about tone. It could be the natural response of an innocent man under scrutiny. It could be something else. The ambiguity gnaws at everyone involved. Behind the scenes, legal preparations accelerate. Search warrants are drafted but not filed. Arrest affidavits are outlined and then shelved. Every document exists in a state of readiness, waiting for the one thing that will push it from hypothetical to actionable. The detectives feel like they're standing on a fault line, tension building beneath their feet. The family is still in the dark about the specifics, but they sense a change. Updates come more frequently now. The tone is different. Less abstract. More careful. They ask fewer questions, afraid of jinxing whatever fragile progress might be underway. Hope, after so many years, is a dangerous thing to hold. As another year edges toward its end, the Florida 2002 case feels closer to transformation than it ever has. Not solved. Not yet. But no longer distant. The past is pressing forward, narrowing, focusing, demanding resolution. The silence that once felt infinite is shrinking, cornered by science, memory, and relentless attention. And somewhere within that tightening space, the truth is no longer drifting. It's standing still, waiting, aware now that it is being approached, that the distance between what happened and what will be known is finally, unmistakably, beginning to close. When pressure reaches a certain point, it stops feeling like tension and starts feeling like gravity. Everything begins to bend toward a single outcome, even if no one is ready to name it yet. In the Florida 2002 case, that gravity pulls the investigation inward, collapsing years of scattered effort into a narrow corridor where every step forward feels heavier than the last. This is the stage where mistakes are fatal, where certainty must be earned inch by inch, and where instinct has to surrender to discipline. The suspect knows something has changed. He doesn't need to be told. People sense these things the way animals sense weather shifts, through tone, timing, absence. He hires an attorney, not loudly, not defensively, just quietly enough to be noticed. The move doesn't prove guilt. It proves awareness. And awareness alters the dynamic immediately. Communication tightens. Questions are routed through legal channels. Casual conversations are replaced by formal requests. The investigation enters a colder, more rigid phase. Detectives adjust without complaint. They expected this. In fact, they were waiting for it. An attorney doesn't end an investigation, it clarifies it. It forces precision. Every next step must justify itself not just ethically, but legally. The margin for improvisation disappears. What remains is method. They return again to the genealogy work, now with sharper focus. The family tree has narrowed. Branches once sprawling are now trimmed back to a manageable few. Each remaining individual is examined not as a suspect, but as a variable. Age, location, physical characteristics, life events. One by one, the variables collapse toward the same conclusion. The suspect isn't just consistent with the DNA. He's increasingly central to it. Analysts refine probability models, recalculating with updated datasets, improved algorithms, better reference populations. The numbers shift incrementally, but directionally. The likelihood strengthens. It doesn't cross the threshold of certainty, but it leans toward it, unmistakably. Science isn't shouting yet, but it's no longer whispering. Prosecutors request a full evidentiary review. Not to approve charges, but to assess trajectory. They want to know whether this case is moving toward prosecution or stalling in permanent limbo. Detectives present everything. The DNA, the genealogy, the behavioral indicators, the witness recollections, the gaps, the weaknesses. They don't oversell. They can't afford to. The response is measured. Encouraging, but cautious. A case could be built, they say, but it would be difficult. Risky. Vulnerable to attack. Without a confession or a definitive forensic match, defense attorneys would have room to maneuver. Jurors would be asked to bridge gaps with inference. Some would. Some wouldn't. The verdict would hang on perception as much as proof. So the detectives look again for something they may have overlooked, something small but solid, something that doesn't rely on interpretation. They revisit digital archives one more time, this time focusing not on content, but on absence. Deleted data. Gaps in records. Devices replaced or discarded unusually close to the time of renewed scrutiny. It's a long shot. Most people cycle through technology without thinking. But patterns matter. They discover that the suspect replaced a personal computer in the mid-2000s, earlier than expected for the era, without a clear reason. The old device was disposed of. Where, exactly, no one can say. The detail alone means little. Combined with everything else, it adds weight. It suggests a sensitivity to traces, to records, to what might linger beyond intention. The investigation circles back to the victim's world one more time, not to find motive, but to eliminate coincidence. Was there any legitimate reason these two lives would have intersected? Any shared space? Any overlapping routine? Slowly, carefully, a thin line appears. A place both frequented in the months before the murder. Not regularly. Not socially. Just enough to make recognition possible. Enough to make a face familiar. Enough to make opening a door plausible. Detectives reconstruct the scenario not as a story, but as a sequence of decisions. A chance recognition. A brief conversation. A moment of lowered guard. The crime doesn't need elaborate planning to be intentional. It only needs opportunity and a trigger. They can't prove that's what happened. But they can show that it could have. Meanwhile, the suspect's attorney begins pushing back subtly, requesting information, questioning timelines, probing for weaknesses. It's not aggressive yet. It's exploratory. A signal that the defense is preparing. The chessboard is filling. The detectives decide it's time for one more interview, this one formal, recorded, conducted with the presence of counsel. It's a risk. The suspect could shut down entirely. He could offer nothing. Or he could make a mistake. They weigh the options and proceed. The room is different this time. Larger. Sterile. No small talk. The suspect sits upright, attorney beside him, posture controlled. The questions are precise, chronological, anchored to documents and records. Dates. Locations. Activities. He answers calmly, but the rhythm is off. There are pauses where there weren't before. Requests to clarify questions. Appeals to memory loss that feel selective. At one point, a detective introduces a detail that hasn't been made public, something only the perpetrator or investigators would know. The suspect doesn't react outwardly. But his attorney does, shifting slightly, eyes narrowing. It's a moment that lasts less than a second, but it's noticed. Logged. Remembered. The interview ends without confrontation. No accusation is made. No confession sought. That isn't the goal. The goal is pressure, not explosion. The detectives leave knowing they've learned something, even if they can't articulate it yet. Outside the room, exhaustion sets in. This stage of a case is emotionally draining, requiring constant restraint. Everyone involved feels the pull toward resolution, the desire to act, to close the circle. But acting too soon would unravel years of work. Patience becomes the most difficult discipline of all. A quiet development follows days later. Another tip comes in, not from media coverage, but from within the suspect's extended family. A relative who has been watching the situation unfold from a distance, uneasy, conflicted. They don't accuse. They don't offer proof. They offer a story. An odd absence. A night years ago when the suspect returned home late, agitated, unusually withdrawn. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it refuses to stay buried. The statement is taken carefully, compassionately. The relative is nervous, aware of the weight of what they're doing. Investigators make no promises. They simply listen. Another human thread is added to the weave. Piece by piece, the case is no longer just forensic or circumstantial. It's becoming contextual. A pattern of behaviors, decisions, silences that, taken together, begin to point in one direction. Not conclusively, but convincingly. The family is finally told that a person of interest has been identified. No name. No details. Just the acknowledgement that the case has narrowed significantly. The reaction is restrained, almost muted. After so many false dawns, hope doesn't surge. It steadies. It waits. The community remains largely unaware of how close the case feels from the inside. Life continues. Cars pass the house without slowing. New residents come and go. The surface of things looks unchanged. But beneath it, momentum has shifted. The investigation is no longer searching outward. It's closing in. Prosecutors begin drafting potential charges in outline form, not to file, but to test coherence. Does the narrative hold? Can the evidence be presented clearly? Will jurors understand not just what happened, but why it matters that it took so long to uncover? The answers are mixed, but improving. There is a sense now, shared but unspoken, that the case has crossed a line it can't retreat from. Even if no arrest is made tomorrow, or next month, or next year, the truth is no longer diffuse. It has shape. It has boundaries. It has a center. And that center is no longer theoretical. The Florida 2002 case, once a distant echo, now feels immediate, alive, dangerous in its proximity. The silence that once protected the unknown is thinning, perforated by data, memory, and persistence. Whatever happened on that morning 2 decades ago is no longer content to remain buried. It is pressing forward, demanding to be named. There is a moment in every long investigation when certainty becomes more dangerous than doubt. When the shape of the truth feels so solid that everyone in the room can see it, touch it, walk around it, yet no one is legally allowed to call it by name. That is where this case now lives, suspended between what is known and what can be proven, between momentum and restraint. The Florida heat outside is relentless, but inside the task force offices, the air feels cold, controlled, almost surgical. The suspect's life begins to subtly change. Not dramatically. Not in ways that would make headlines. But the people closest to him notice it. He becomes more rigid in routine, more guarded in conversation. He stops lingering in public places. Social media accounts go quiet. Old friendships fade without explanation. None of it is illegal. All of it is noted. Behavior under scrutiny has a way of reorganizing itself, like a room rearranged after someone realizes it's being watched. Investigators monitor from a distance. No tails. No overt surveillance. That would risk spooking him further, pushing him into a defensive posture that could harden into silence forever. Instead, they observe through records, through patterns, through what changes and what doesn't. They look for cracks. Not breaks. Cracks are quieter. The forensic team revisits the physical evidence again, knowing full well it won't magically produce something new. That's not why they do it. They do it to eliminate doubt. To ensure that if this case ever stands before a jury, no one can say the evidence was handled casually, or revisited selectively. Every item is recatalogued. Every log reviewed. Every chain of custody verified. The past is being audited with modern eyes. A single fiber, once dismissed as inconclusive, is re-examined with updated microscopy. The result is still inconclusive. But now it's conclusively so. That matters. Ambiguity, once clarified, loses its power to undermine. Meanwhile, the DNA continues its quiet work. Not by changing, but by contextualizing itself. New databases open. More people submit samples. Distant relatives become closer ones in statistical terms. The suspect's genetic shadow sharpens, its edges less blurred than before. Analysts are careful with language. They avoid words like match. They use phrases like consistent with and cannot be excluded. Precision is protection. A breakthrough almost happens, then doesn't. A discarded item is recovered from a public space the suspect frequents. A cup. A napkin. Something mundane. It's tested. The DNA is partial, degraded. It aligns in some places, diverges in others. It isn't usable. The disappointment is real, but brief. This team has learned not to attach emotion to single moments. Hope, unchecked, becomes liability. The victim's family is informed that progress continues, but slowly. The phrasing is deliberate. They are not promised resolution. They are not fed optimism. They are given honesty. It's all they've ever asked for. The years have taught them that certainty, when it comes, must be earned, not offered. One detective, working late, notices something that had been present in the file for years but never foregrounded. A small inconsistency in the suspect's early statements to acquaintances after the crime. Not to police. To people in his orbit. A casual comment about being somewhere he later claimed he'd never been. It was brushed off at the time as confusion, a misremembered day. Now, placed alongside cell records and employment logs, it feels heavier. They track down the person who remembers the comment. Time has eroded the edges of memory, but the core remains. The statement is reaffirmed. Not dramatically. Not with confidence. But with the quiet insistence of something that never quite faded. Another thread is tightened. The prosecution team convenes again. This time, the tone is different. Less hypothetical. More tactical. They talk about jury pools. About how cold cases are perceived. About the burden of explaining why justice waited so long. They discuss how to present forensic genealogy without overwhelming or alienating. How to humanize data. How to translate probability into understanding. They also discuss risk. Because risk is unavoidable now. Charging too early could destroy the case forever. Waiting too long could do the same. The clock isn't ticking loudly, but it's there, its presence felt in every decision. The suspect's attorney files a request for discovery, limited but pointed. It's a move designed to test boundaries, to see how much the state is willing to reveal, how confident it feels. The response is minimal. By the book. No tells are given. This isn't a bluffing stage. It's endurance. The community remains mostly oblivious, but rumors circulate in the way they always do. Someone heard something. Someone saw a name mentioned somewhere. It's nothing concrete, but the atmosphere shifts. People start revisiting old conversations, old assumptions. The past becomes conversational again. That alone changes things. A journalist submits a public records request. It's denied. Too active. Too sensitive. The denial itself becomes a story, a whisper that something is happening behind closed doors. The investigation doesn't welcome attention, but it no longer fears it either. Exposure is no longer a threat. It's a countdown. Inside the suspect's home, according to later testimony, sleep becomes difficult. He wakes in the night. He checks doors twice. He listens for sounds that never come. Guilt doesn't always announce itself as remorse. Sometimes it manifests as vigilance, as the constant scanning for danger that once protected a secret and now threatens to reveal it. Investigators decide to escalate, but subtly. They interview a peripheral witness again, someone who had nothing of value years ago. This time, the context has changed. The questions land differently. The witness recalls a detail they didn't think mattered. A car parked oddly. A figure moving quickly. It still isn't definitive. But it aligns. Alignment is everything. The case file grows heavier, not thicker. Pages are removed as often as they are added. Redundancy is eliminated. Weak lines are cut. What remains is leaner, stronger, harder to dismantle. The narrative is being refined not for drama, but for resilience. There is talk, finally, of an arrest strategy. Not a date. Not a plan. Just the acknowledgement that the moment is approaching. That when it happens, it must be clean, unassailable, respectful of both the law and the weight of time that precedes it. No spectacle. No rush. Just inevitability. The victim's name is spoken more often now, in meetings, in notes, in quiet moments. Not as a symbol. As a person. The investigators remind themselves why this matters, why patience has been demanded for so long. Closure isn't the goal. Truth is. Closure, if it comes, will be a byproduct. As weeks pass, the suspect makes a mistake. A small one. He contacts someone he shouldn't have, asks a question he doesn't need answered. It's innocuous on the surface. But the timing is wrong. The wording is careful in a way that reveals fear. The call is legal. It's recorded. It becomes part of the file. The gravity that once pulled everything inward now begins to compress. The space for maneuver shrinks. The investigation has reached the point where the truth, whatever it is, can no longer remain passive. It must either be asserted or lost. In the quiet hours of early morning, a lead detective reviews the case from beginning to end, not as evidence, but as a human sequence. Decisions. Opportunities. Silences. Regrets. The story no longer feels incomplete. It feels unfinished. And unfinished things have a way of demanding an ending. The Florida 2002 case is no longer dormant. It is awake. And it is moving toward a moment that cannot be delayed much longer. The moment arrives without ceremony. No announcement. No countdown. Just a subtle shift in posture across the room when the final piece settles into place and no one argues with it. That silence, heavier than any raised voice, is how everyone knows the case has crossed the point of return. The Florida 2002 investigation is no longer circling a truth. It is standing directly in front of it, close enough to feel its breath. The catalyst is not dramatic. There is no surprise witness bursting through a door, no sudden forensic miracle. It is a convergence. Timelines finally align without forcing. Statements once shrugged off now reinforce each other. The DNA probabilities, recalculated yet again, reach a level that no longer reads as academic. It is still not a match in the courtroom sense, but it has become a gravitational fact, exerting pressure on every other piece of evidence around it. Prosecutors ask for one more comprehensive briefing. Not an update. A reckoning. Everything on the table. Everything challenged. The detectives comply, knowing this is the meeting where belief has to survive scrutiny. They walk through the case slowly, methodically, resisting the urge to dramatize. They let the accumulation speak for itself. They show how the suspect's movements fit the window. How his statements evolved over time. How his reactions changed when confronted with specific details. How his digital footprint thinned precisely where it should have thickened. How chance encounters weren't chance at all, just unnoticed intersections waiting for context. The room doesn't erupt in agreement. It doesn't need to. Heads nod. Pens stop moving. The questions shift from if to how. That is the tell. That is when everyone understands what comes next. But before anything happens, before warrants or arrests or headlines, the past demands one final examination. The detectives return, once more, to the earliest days of the case. Not to relive them, but to audit them for bias. Were assumptions made too quickly? Were paths abandoned too early? Were there alternative suspects who deserved more attention? They force themselves to argue against their own conclusions, to dismantle the case as aggressively as any defense attorney would. It holds. Not perfectly. No case ever does. But well enough. Strong enough. Stronger than it has ever been. A decision is made to seek a covert DNA confirmation. Not through force. Not through deception that would taint the result. Through patience. Through observation. The suspect is careful, but no one is careful forever. People leave traces without thinking. A cup. A tissue. A cigarette but discarded without ceremony. The ordinary debris of life becomes the final frontier. Days pass. Then weeks. The team waits, resisting urgency. And then, one afternoon, it happens. The suspect eats in a public place, leaves behind what he doesn't think twice about. The item is collected legally, discreetly, with no interaction. It is logged, sealed, transported. The lab knows the weight of what they're handling. The test is prioritized, but not rushed. Controls are double-checked. Procedures followed to the letter. No one speaks much while they wait. Anticipation at this stage is dangerous. Hope has learned to sit quietly. When the results come back, they are not explosive. They don't scream. They confirm. The DNA profile aligns. Not partially. Not ambiguously. Fully. The room absorbs it in silence. Some people close their eyes. Others stare at the paper as if it might dissolve. A few feel relief. Others feel something closer to grief. After all these years, certainty is not purely satisfying. It is heavy. It carries consequences that cannot be undone. The prosecutor doesn't celebrate. He nods once, slowly, and asks for the warrant to be drafted. The language is careful. Conservative. Every word chosen with the understanding that it will be dissected, challenged, attacked. This is not about winning. This is about holding. The arrest is planned for a morning when the suspect's routine is predictable. No sirens. No spectacle. Just uniformed officers, calm voices, clear instructions. The suspect doesn't resist. He looks stunned, but not surprised. As the cuffs close, his shoulders sag in a way that suggests not shock, but release. As if something he has been carrying for a very long time has finally shifted weight. The news doesn't break immediately. Authorities hold the information, notifying the victim's family first. They do it in person. There are no speeches. No promises of closure. Just facts. Just the acknowledgement that the truth has finally caught up. The family listens. Some cry. Some don't. Grief doesn't perform on cue. What matters is that the years of not knowing have ended. That the question mark that hovered over every holiday, every quiet moment, has finally resolved into a name, a face, a reason. When the story becomes public, it moves fast. Headlines light up. Cold case solved. Arrest after decades. Community stunned. The phrases are familiar, almost ritualistic. But behind them is a reality too complex to fit into columns. A life interrupted. Another life unraveling. A town forced to look back at itself with new eyes. The suspect is interrogated, but there is no dramatic confession. He listens. He denies. He deflects. He eventually falls silent. The evidence doesn't need his cooperation. It stands without him. As the case moves toward trial, the defense prepares its narrative. Memory fades. Evidence ages. Mistakes were made. They will argue contamination, bias, coincidence. They will say the investigation saw what it wanted to see. They will question motives. They will question science. The prosecution is ready. They don't rely on any single piece. They rely on coherence. On how each fragment reinforces the others. On how randomness gives way to pattern. On how probability, when stacked high enough, becomes reality. In court, the victim's name is spoken again and again. Each time, it lands differently. Less as an abstraction. More as a presence. Jurors listen. They watch. They feel the weight of time pressing down on every testimony. Outside, the community debates. Some are relieved. Some are skeptical. Some feel betrayed by the idea that someone so ordinary could carry something so dark for so long. The case becomes a mirror, reflecting fears about proximity, about how well we truly know the people around us. The verdict, when it comes, is delivered without drama. Guilty. There is no applause. No cheers. Justice is not entertainment. It is resolution. It is an ending that arrives too late to repair what was broken, but just in time to stop the story from bleeding into another generation. The Florida 2002 case is officially closed. The files are archived. The task force disbands. The detectives move on to other cases, carrying with them the quiet knowledge that persistence, not brilliance, solved this one. But long after the courtroom empties, after the headlines fade, the echoes remain. In the house where it happened. In the street where life continued unaware. In the family who now must learn how to live with answers instead of questions. Cold cases don't end with closure. They end with truth. And truth, once uncovered, never fully goes back to sleep. Truth does not end a story. It fractures it into aftermaths. Courtrooms empty, microphones shut off, and the machinery of justice grinds to a halt, but the consequences keep moving, spreading outward in quiet, uneven waves. In the Florida 2002 case, the verdict is not a full stop. It is a pressure release, sudden and incomplete, leaving behind a vacuum where speculation once lived and something heavier now settles in. The community wakes up the next morning unchanged on the surface. The same roads. The same stores. The same sunlight cutting across driveways and sidewalks. But conversations are different. Names are spoken carefully now. People replay interactions they once dismissed as mundane. The ordinary past becomes suspicious in hindsight, every memory re-examined for signs that were never meant to be seen. The house connected to the suspect becomes an object of quiet fascination. No crowds gather. No cameras linger. Just the occasional slowed car, the brief glance from a passerby. It is strange how quickly a place can lose its anonymity, how walls can seem thinner once a secret has been dragged into daylight. The house itself says nothing. It never did. Inside the detention facility, the man at the center of it all adjusts to confinement with the same restraint he showed under investigation. He does not protest loudly. He does not collapse. He observes. He measures. Guards note his calm, his tendency to keep to himself. Psychologists will later debate what that calm means. Control. Dissociation. Exhaustion. No consensus is reached. Labels feel inadequate. He meets with his attorney, discusses appeals, technicalities, possible strategies. The language is procedural, stripped of emotion. The law has its own rhythm, and he follows it. But at night, when there is nothing left to manage, nothing left to anticipate, the weight of years presses down. Sleep comes in fragments. Dreams repeat themselves without variation. There is no escape clause in memory. The victim's family faces a different reckoning. 4 years, grief was paired with uncertainty, pain cushioned by the possibility that one day the truth would arrive and restore balance. Now the truth is here, solid and immovable, and it does not bring the relief people imagine. It brings a new responsibility, learning how to grieve without mystery. They revisit old photographs, home videos, letters, the moments frozen before everything stopped. The person they lost is suddenly framed by context, by an explanation that feels too small to justify the damage done. Knowing how and why does not bring her back. It only sharpens the absence. Some family members feel anger surge late, delayed by years of waiting. Others feel a strange numbness, as if the emotional muscles have forgotten how to react now that the long tension has released. Counselors say this is normal. There is no normal. Detectives return to their desks, to new cases, but the Florida 2002 file lingers. They think about the decisions that mattered. The nights they almost gave up. The leads they nearly dismissed. They understand, better than most, how easily this case could have remained unsolved forever. How close it came to being another name on a list of unresolved tragedies. One detective drives past the original crime scene weeks later, not as part of an assignment, just passing through. The street looks smaller than he remembers. Less ominous. Time has softened its edges. He parks for a moment, sits in the car, and allows himself to feel what he didn't have time for before. Pride. Sadness. A quiet kind of relief. Then he drives on. The case becomes a reference point in training seminars, in law enforcement conferences, in discussions about forensic genealogy and cold case persistence. Slides are shown. Charts explained. Success is dissected. But what cannot be taught is the patience required to wait years for progress measured in millimeters. That part remains invisible. Journalists move on. New stories replace the old ones. The headlines that once burned bright fade into archives, searchable but rarely revisited. The public's attention is brief by design. Outrage has an expiration date. Curiosity moves on quickly. But some people can't move on. Former classmates, neighbors, co-workers, those who crossed paths with the suspect in the years between the crime and the arrest struggle with a quieter kind of shock. They ask themselves how well they truly knew him, how close they were to something they never sensed. Trust fractures in subtle ways. It takes time to rebuild. In private moments, questions resurface. Why then? Why her? Why that morning? The court records offer facts, not meaning. Motive remains partially obscured, inferred rather than confessed. The human need for narrative completion goes unsatisfied. Not every mystery dissolves under scrutiny. Some only change shape. The prison sentence is handed down. Lengthy. Definitive. The words echo through the courtroom, heavy with consequence. The man listens, expression unreadable. When it is over, he is led away without looking back. The door closes. A chapter seals itself shut. Years from now, the case will be referenced as an example of justice delayed but not denied. A success story. A reminder that persistence pays off. That science evolves. That time does not always protect the guilty. These statements will be true, and yet incomplete. Because the real legacy of the Florida 2002 case is quieter. It lives in the knowledge that some answers come too late to heal fully. That resolution does not equal peace. That the passage of time does not dull all wounds, it only changes how they ache. Late at night, in homes scattered across the state, people lie awake thinking about how close danger once was, how ordinary it looked, how long it hid in plain sight. They lock doors. They double-check windows. They remind themselves that most people are not monsters, even if some monsters look exactly like everyone else. The case is closed on paper, in records, in databases. But in memory, it remains active, a cautionary echo that lingers long after the final gavel falls. Because some stories don't end when the truth is revealed. They end when the living learn how to carry it.